broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Essentials webinars for today. We've got two great speakers today, Shaun Johnston from Burdekin Shire Council and Chris Mooney from Department of Environment and Science. We'll get started pretty quickly. We don't have very many announcements today. In fact, the only thing I was going to announce was the talks for next week, and also remind people that the Qldwater footy tipping competition's back up, much to my wife's dismay. We're tipping on NRL and AFL this year. All you people who are already in the competition, put your tips in. Those who aren't, you've still got time to join if you want to have a go. Next week's presentations, just to catch up, people who are going to be on for a little while. Philip Kamar on microalgal and anaerobic water treatment at the Helidon Regional STP. It's a focus there on efficient nutrient recovery and greenhouse gas reduction. And we've also got Dr. Dan Deere talking about the new Colossus project, that sewer surveillance project that Water RA is starting and looking for partners for. So join us for that. But let's get started with the talks today. Shaun's going to lead us off, and he's going to be talking about old school asset condition assessment. Thanks, Shaun. I'll just hand over the control to you.
So can everyone see my screen now? It's fine.
Yep. Looks good.
Hi everyone, my name's Shaun Johnston. I'm the manager of water and wastewater in the Burdekin Shire Council. Burdekin's typical of many regional councils. We're relatively, we're at the lower end of a medium-sized councils, fairly small population centres, servicing a number of small towns. I guess the few unique things we've got is that we've got raw water that we've hardly treated all, and that is very inexpensive for the people to purchase. Other than that though, we have a lot in common with many regional communities, and that's really the focus of my discussion today on old school asset condition assessment. I'd like to point out at the outset, I'm not a troglodyte. I don't argue that there's a lot of great new technology around, and that continues to provide a better way of doing things, whether it be gathering the information or interpreting it, and applying that information to our knowledge of our systems. However, we should never forget that we should choose something that's fit for purpose. So our methods and methodology should match what works best in our case for our size, and given that we're often fairly remote from the ability to employ various contractors and the like. Many small, medium water service providers are in a similar situation to us, having often poor storage of data. They don't have complete GIS information. They don't have complete asset information. They don't even have many plans and manuals for a lot of their assets. They don't have a lot of money to throw around because they have a limited asset base and customer base, and they don't have access in many cases to efficiencies of scale, which of course is why we like to be part of QRAP regions and the like. And we often suffer from a lack of convenience because of our isolation, and particularly in regard to knowledge. And I think that's one of the great things about these talks, is that they've made this information much more accessible to a wider group of people that most times would be lucky to get in touch with their peers once a year. The thing to understand about small providers is that we know our networks very well. Even though we don't have a lot of those tangible information sources and storages, we do know what's going on in our networks very well. It's a part of our human resources, so we may not have the skills often that the larger organisations have, but we often have knowledge as a part of our human resources. And staff often have a good feel for how things work. They have good mechanical sympathy, for example, with the mechanical devices, and get very clever about reading and understanding problems that are going to arise before they take place. So while we mightn't consider them highly skilled in a paper sort of way, they certainly have their means to be effective and resourceful. The thing we do though is we work on the same framework that the big organisations work on, and from our perspective we often see that these have been developed with and for the larger organisations more than for the smaller ones, and so that often provides extra challenges for us. But that doesn't mean we have or should do things the same way that the big ones do. We can approach things from a different direction. One of the things that I see in the industry, and this is just my commentary on it, is that as an industry we all suffer a bit from the latest shiny thing syndrome, and so we all fall prey, I guess, to some extent to the sales pitches, and we often dive in very quickly behind the latest technologies, which may have many things in their favour, but often they're not fully sorted, and that becomes an extra problem if you try and apply that in a remote rural community. And often we just don't do enough research ourselves, I guess, or analysis of how the particular product meets our needs, whether it really is a fully effective solution. We often see someone do a presentation at YO or one of those events, and then we get all excited about it and go home and try and implement it ourselves without always appreciating the true scope of the job to make that effective. And often, particularly if we're using consultants, they often provide us a solution that comes straight off the shelf rather than being truly fit for needs. And we can sometimes judge others for making different decisions than we make, and perhaps look down on them without knowing the whole truth of the matter. So that's why we can gain a great deal from taking opportunities like this to share knowledge and to see what other people are doing. The first area I talk about is sewer networks, and particularly smoke testing. We use the normal asset assessment methods for sewers. We have our own CCTV. We have a rod camera for small jobs, but we have a robot camera too. And we use that to carry out regular inspections of our networks, which we try and do on a roughly 5-year cycle. And in fact, we have relined nearly all of our networks now. What have we learned from going through that process over the years? Well, the biggest learning for me has been that once you make more capacity in your network from relining your mains and reducing network infiltration, all that does is make room for the infiltration from the house drains, which there's almost as much length in house drains as there is in your network often, and often they're in much poorer condition than your network. So you still get the same amount of water flowing through your pipes from that and from illegal connections. Not much you can do about the private drains, but there is something we can do about the illegal connections. The other thing I've learned is that what we thought might last for 50, 70, 80 years in regard to relining isn't lasting that long. Some of our 20-year-old relining is already starting to come apart at the seams, and we're having to look at a second go around. So, and they're quite messy to clean up when they go wrong. But if you have a look at our SCADA, it shows quite clearly that illegal connections and inflows from those are our biggest problem. Now, I don't have the rainfall figures on this graph as well, but available to me, but I can tell you that in this rain event earlier this year, that the rain started falling about 7 a.m. in the morning, and almost immediately you can see the graph there braces to the sky as the inflow, not infiltration, comes into the system. And by 10 o'clock, just 3 hours later, there's no extra flows going into the system. So that's definitely not infiltration, that is inflows. That's a picture of inflows. And if you looked at the rainfall chart for that, it would show rain probably fell up until around about 9 o'clock and stopped. And then it took an hour for the system to clear those inflows. And I see that time and time again through the almost 50 pump stations that we've got. There's no doubt that that's our biggest problem. So smoke testing, for those who aren't all that familiar with it, includes a close examination of the plumbings on the property as well as looking for where the smoke shouldn't be coming out. So it helps identify illegal and substandard connections and plumbings on the properties. And it really doesn't cost much more than the labour to carry out. although it does require some skill, and that's where we have some problems. There's a considerable administrative overhead because we have to apply the regulations in relation to accessing people's properties, giving them notice and such like. And as far as assets go, if you've got a smoke machine, a camera, and a crew of 3 people, a bit of documentation and training, then you can carry out smoke detection. It's not that hard to do. One of the biggest problems we found with smoke detection in our new regime of smoke detection is that since the smaller capacity toilets, the lower water saving toilets have been come into play, the weight of the toilet water is much, much less than the old days when we did it last. And we've blown up a few toilets as a result of that. And that's where the real skill comes in. And I think everyone needs to get and have a chat to an expert in the business before they embark upon that path. You probably won't make as big a mess of it as we did. We blew up our director's toilet first, but still, it's quite embarrassing when it happens. That's a smoke machine on the left. It's simply a fan with a heater element, or some of them actually just use the exhaust pipe from the motor. There's a few different sorts around. And as you can see on the right there, it sits in the manhole. You run it and it blows rather than it blows smoke down the sewer. Now there are some that actually pressurise the sewer, and that's why I like this model the best. It doesn't pressurise it as much as some of the others. But there's a few things available now which we're going to investigate further, such as vents that you can put in the place of manhole lids, and that will help with that back pressure problem that I was talking about as well. The smoke is just vegetable oil. It's largely harmless, although if you get enough of it in a house, it puts a lovely glossy sheen on the walls and takes a bit of cleaning off. These are the sort of things you're going to find. This is a house connection that's basically been broken and no one's ever bothered to fix. So that's a very clear example where someone needs to get their plumbing sorted out. Here we are. This is where a house connection is in a manhole, and it's an outside dropper, and it's broken off near the manhole. On the left here is a swimming pool. It's been plumbed in without a proper gully trap directly into the house drain. Doesn't meet plumbing code. And on the right there, you can see the house drain's broken right next to the house. Very, very common to find cracks and damage in house drains where a slab goes over them and creates a pressure point on them, and over time they wear and break and crack. Not so common to find it coming out from under a slab in the front yard when the sewer runs in the backyard though. That tells you that someone has taken a stormwater drain from their downpipe that used to run out on the footpath, and they put a T on the bottom of the downpipe and run it out the back into your sewer system, and not cap the other end that they've taken off. Very obvious one, that. One of the biggest problems we have here is it's very flat country, and so when it floods, the stormwater tends to pool on the ground everywhere, and people lift their manhole lids and sit a brake handle or shovel handle under them and let all the water run down the manholes. So we've fitted these secondary lids that provide a seal underneath. We have a very easy to read sign on them that says if you tamper with this, you'll receive a big fine. The reason we do that is because if you have a look at this one, this is one we've had there for many years, and someone's taken it out, taken a grinder to it and cut 3 holes in it so that they can let the water out. That's probably our biggest source of trouble up here, quite frankly. So as part of our smoking program, we go around and we put these in all the manholes, sealing them down and putting that notice on them to try and encourage people to do the right thing. That's about it for the sewer smoking. We'll move on now to leak detection in the water network. Leak detection was pretty high tech a dozen years ago when I came into the industry. I don't think it's quite so high tech anymore. Sorry. So a little bit about our area. The average household use up here is about 750 kilolitres per year, with a water price of 26 cents a kilolitre. Most of our costs are really in pumping the water, very little treatment. But people don't have a good appreciation for the value of water, unfortunately. Most of our water comes out of bores about 20 metres deep, sitting in a nice sand aquifer, so it's pretty good water, although we're discovering a few problems with it now. We use very low chlorine residuals because we have issues with iron and manganese in our bore water, and it precipitates out in the network and gives us dirty water, so we always run as close to the wire as we can with our chlorine residuals to minimise that problem. At least 85% of our water is used outside, and we estimate that about 30% of our water is unaccounted, and mostly that's made up of water losses. Nearly everything is metered now. When we have a leak, because we're in a sandy alluvial delta, the water generally gravitates downwards back into the aquifers, and you don't see any sign of the leaks on the surface. In fact, many of the pipes sit in groundwater for considerable parts of the year anyway. Our network is a little worse for wear after 50 years of reactive maintenance only. No real preventative maintenance. Our valves are in a bad way as well. And we have an extensive rural network on the end of our urban network, which creates many problems for us. But mostly AC pipelines, and some of them are beginning to fail because often of the original pipe quality or the way they were laid. So similar to Townsville's experience from the other week, we tend to find that development by development, we fail block by block rather than pipe by pipe. So I first carried out leak detection in the Gympie area, and we had losses estimated at over 35% there at the time. And at the time, we only found a couple of large leaks and a couple of little leaks, and we actually dropped our losses back to below 5% for the town of Gympie when we did that work. But what we observed was it began to grow again almost immediately, and year on year it got worse. So from that experience, I learnt that it only takes a couple of leaks to generate quite high losses in a system if they're big leaks. You can find those leaks without getting dedicated resources in to do it. It's something that your own guys can do quite readily, just 10 minutes at the beginning and end of each day. And it's something you have to keep doing. It needs to be an ongoing program. You can't just do it once and let it go. But having got those results in Gympie, when I found a similar situation in Ayr, I set about carrying out the same program there. Many councils probably have these. These are just localised leak detection systems. We use them to find at the last part of the leak detection program to find as close as possible to the exact location, so as we don't have to dig up a whole street. We can go within a metre or two normally of where the leak is with these. This device is connected to the computer and it talks to the loggers. The loggers are there. They're just little magnetic bombs that probably weigh almost a kilo each, I guess. They're quite heavy and they've got quite a strong magnet on them. And it's only a matter of placing them on a metal part like a hydrant or a valve at reasonable distances in between and leaving them overnight or for several nights for them to do to listen to sounds on the system. So even closer up. And that's one sitting in a hydrant pit, a little bit closer up. You can see I was too lazy to clean the dirt out of the bottom of the hydrant, but as long as it sits on the ears there, in fact, that's where we tend to get the best connection we find. We can get a signal back on that, and it works quite all right on any sort of pipe. Even the AC, we're getting quite effective readings back off it. So I'll show you some of those. We've only done about a week's work over the last few months on it, so we haven't got a long way down the track. You'll see in this view that once you upload those readings into the system, it basically does a calculation You can see on the right there the orange or the yellows that may well be a leak, and the reds that are probably leaks. Quite frankly, when I look at that, none of those turned out to be leaks. And so a bit of skill comes into reading it in the end, but none of those are leaks. This one here was interesting though. This one here showed that there was a really bad leak up the top end there of our industrial estate. And we went out there and we found that where a driveway went over a pipe, we did indeed have a leak. And we went out a little later, there we are. And after we fixed the leak, and that's what we got. So you can see how the readings do correlate to what's actually going on in the system and what is in the system. Obviously though, what looked like a leak down the bottom end of that block wasn't. It was an echo or someone using water at an unusual time on their service, and so it was giving us a false reading. Same here. There were no leaks here at all, as it turned out, but there was a lot of noise there. The fact that our close to a railway track might have had something to do with that, I think, but it's certainly not, while it's a science, it certainly has some room for variability, I'd have to say. This one was interesting. We found two very interesting things here. There were two that came up that might be leaks, and indeed, neither of them were leaks. One was a service we didn't know we had, so we were able to put that on the books. The other was an illegal connection. And so people were using these in the middle of the night when we were doing your logging, and it drew our attention to them. So you're not just catching leaks, you're catching asset information that you didn't even know about, and you're catching people who may have illegal connections as well. So look, I think for a 1 week's effort, we had a pretty fruitful experience in that first week. People were still coming to grips with the software. No one had any great experience with it. Our plumbers were just going out for 10 to 20 minutes in the morning and putting them out, and the next morning they'd pick them up. So we'd get a couple of rounds of listening done each week, and over those couple of weeks we found a good leak, service we didn't know about, and an illegal connection, which I think is pretty good odds, really. We'd all be happy with that for the little amount of time that's involved. Righto, so we went back and did some of these areas a number of times, and that was more or less us learning to use the system and understand what the system was really telling us. So there's a bit of time to be spent initially to understand it, especially by the computer operator inside. We think it's worthwhile continuing, that's for sure. So look, that's about all I've got to say on the subject at this stage. I'm hoping that there'll be a few questions around, and I'm happy to move to questions now.
Thanks very much, Shaun. That was excellent, really interesting. I forgot to remind you at the beginning, but you can enter questions on the chat question function. So put them in there, and Ryan will shoot them out to the audience. Don't try and answer the questions on there; it doesn't tend to work. So we've got a few questions for you, Shaun, but I just wanted to start with how much did that sort of those programs cost you to set up? Because you're a small council, and many small councils say that it's a bit too expensive for them.
Look, the smoking is under $10,000 to set up, and depending on how many and how big area you want to do at once, you can start at under $30,000 to do the leak detection. I think that system we've got is in the mid-30s to buy, and in our experience, they'll run for 5 or 6 years before you start to have any problems with batteries dying or anything like that. So.
And is that affordable for your council, for the benefits you get?
For our council particularly, so what I didn't talk about in the discussion was that we've got a massive PFAS contamination of our main bore site. So water's pretty precious to us as water suppliers up here, even though the people don't appreciate how precious it is at the moment. And being able to stop a few leaks like that has made all the difference to our baseline operations already, and being able to maintain water services without having to put anyone on restrictions, even though we're desperately running around trying to find more water sources at the moment. So.
Fair enough. And there's a question about what sort of leak detection software was that you were using?
Okay, so that's Gooderman. Gooderman supplied the hardware and the software of the brand we're using. I think there are only a couple of brands on the market. I wouldn't recommend one over another. I think the technology is fine in all cases.
And you mentioned when you're talking about relining that you had some of the technology you used was failing after 20 years. Someone just asked what sort of tech that was. Yeah,
so mostly that is fiberglass relining. So some of the earlier relinings were all fiberglass, and that creates a real mess. It almost creates a non-return valve in your system when part of that sags down off the roof of your pipe, or even if it curls up off the floor of your pipe, and extremely hard to get out by jetting or anything like that, because the bits that really hang on, it's hard to cut the fibres, and that's the only real solution often is to reline it. The other relining where we've had some problems is the spiral wound, where some damage has been done to the pipe, I would assume, when it was put in, and the wire is pulled out, and it's not obvious at the time, but over a period of time the plastic frays and starts to form long strands that hang down just like roots in the system and catch everything. They're the two that we've had experienced problems with at this stage.
And people are interested in your other technology with the yellow manhole cover you showed. Is that a rain stopper?
Yeah, once again, there's 3 or 4 brands of that around. They seal down as a second layer under your main manhole cover that you can seal with a heavy grease or a light tar or whatever you choose. We actually put 3 pop rivets into the concrete to seal it, and we make the local plumbers aware that they're not to remove it. If they need to get into a manhole, they have to call us. And it just allows us a way of policing that miscreants in the community who channel huge quantities of stormwater down our manholes.
Miscreants in Burdekin, hey? And a question about whether you need to engage your fire department before you do the smoke testing, or does your customer engagement process cover any concerns?
Good question. Look, we've got quite a large checklist that we go through each time before we do the program. So under the regulation, you can only run the program for 3 months and have to be a council resolution. So you've got to keep that council. At that time, we notify the Central Fire Department, the dispatch centre, and then usually on a weekly basis we'll give them a call and let them know what area we're working in. It's very embarrassing when you get a lot of smoke coming out of the top office at council and the CEO calls the fire brigade on you.
Boss's toilet, or how would you rate the 2 there?
Oh no,
Shaun,
blowing the boss's toilet is probably the more embarrassing of the 2, I think.
That's cool. We've got some benchmarking. There's a few more questions coming in there, but we might have to wrap it up there so we can get to Chris Mooney. But you've had a lot of conversation, a lot of questions there, so I think you've kept the audience well entertained. Thank you.
No worries. Happy to talk to people in the future if they want to have a chat.
Cheers, Shaun. We'll pass these questions on to you and work with you, and we can get them back out to the people who ask them. All right, well, we'll move on to the second presentation today is Chris Mooney from DS. She's going to talk about the regulatory approach to COVID-19 as a bit of a summary and some other initiatives as well. It's a bit of a general presentation. Over to you, Chris.
I should take myself off mute. So you can hear me, see me, and hopefully see my presentation.
Got your screen and we've got your dragon in the background, so all good.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk to the group today. Of course, it is a group that's close to my heart. I've been working with you guys for the last 5 years, so I always enjoy coming along and being part of it. Sorry, just getting my technology sorted. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the land throughout Queensland on which we meet today. I acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara Ugarabal people, the traditional owners of the country on which I live. I recognise their continuing connection to land, sea and community, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'd like to start off today by firstly applauding all of you guys in the industry for the amazing response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You've yet again proven to be extremely resilient and focused on maintaining these essential community services. There's been a lot of work done to ensure that you are prepared for any supply chain and staffing matters that might come up as a result of the measures put in place. And I feel like now that we've all done this hard work, it does feel like the emergency has passed somewhat. But I feel that we're really well prepared for what comes next as restrictions start to ease. Like most of you, if not all of you, my division within ESR in DES activated our business continuity plan early. The result of which was that most of our staff are currently working from home, as I am today. This includes both our assessment and our compliance staff, and obviously our business continuity plan is there to ensure that we continue to deliver our core business. Some of the changes you might be interested in is we did suspend proactive compliance inspections. We have been continuing to undertake reactive ones, and there has been quite a spike because now that everyone's working at home, people are complaining about noise from industry and other things nearby. So we certainly haven't stopped being busy in our compliance area, but we have suspended our proactive inspections. So you might have noticed you haven't been getting regular visits or any visits from your local compliance centre. As part of the work, from the assessment point of view, it's just been business as usual. And again, if any of you have been going through any assessment processes, you'll note that you'll have been working with my team, and we haven't had any issues with responding to or meeting statutory timeframes and that. So hopefully that's all been running smoothly. I've been the DES representative on the DNRME COVID-19 Water Supply Continuity Steering Committee, along with Queensland Water, like Rob and Dave. There's been industry reps and reps from other Queensland government departments. So that's how I've been able to follow along and understand what the industry's been doing to make sure that we're all prepared. So from my department's point of view, we very quickly or very early on commenced developing some information sheets, especially relating to essential services such as waste and waste recovery, waste services, and then to a lesser extent, sewage treatment. I'll get onto some of those later, but The other thing that we really focused on was how we could support our EA holders, and we've put together some tools to do that. And there's even been some legislation changes that have occurred which hopefully assist industry in managing during this crisis. So I'll talk about those tools as we go through, even though I guess it feels like where the emergency has subsided somewhat, at least the tools are in place in case there's anything that flares up in the future. I guess everyone is now focusing on commencing a transition, you know, back to normal life, whilst, you know, maintaining the current restrictions. Certainly in our office, we're talking about how we'll transition back to the office, but while maintaining social distancing. And I guess the other thing we're all looking at the moment is supporting economic recovery. Because we all know there is still some uncertainty ahead, and I'll talk a little bit, not that I certainly don't have any silver bullets to discuss around economic recovery, but I'll talk a little bit about my views on what you can do to be prepared. So first, I won't dwell on this too much because I know Queensland Water has these links on their website. So as we've developed some of this material, it certainly has been quick to go up on Queensland Water's resource site for you guys to access, and maybe you've already had a look at it, but I'll just run through it really quickly in case you haven't had a chance. So on the DES website, we do have a page that's devoted to information for environmental authority holders. On this page, we do have some information sheets, again, related to waste and resource recovery industry and including clinical waste. So some of you might also be involved in the waste service part of your council. They may be of use to you. We also did one information sheet we had to prepare very early on, was one in relation to biosolids reuse, and to reassure the public, I guess, to some extent, that the reuse of biosolids in accordance with the End of Waste Code was safe, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. This arose because there were some motivated community members who were blocking the gate to some agricultural land where biosolids were being placed, and you know, we realised we had to get some information out quickly. So I will just focus in on one particular document that you'll find on that previous page. This is our COVID-19 event compliance notification form, which you can find on that page if you're having difficulty meeting compliance with your EA. In particular, so this is the first page, it's a very short document, easy to understand and fill in. I just thought I'd point out here that it says plain and clear on the front page there that the administering authority will not take enforcement action in circumstances where the EA holder is able to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the administering authority that it will be unable to comply with an EA condition because of the direction of the Chief Health Officer, and it will otherwise take and has taken all reasonable and practical measures to prevent environmental impacts. So it's quite a clear statement from our department that we're trying to work with EA holders. We're cognizant of the fact that things will happen as a result of trying to meet the direction of the Chief Health Officer, and we want to work with you. So the next page is pretty straightforward, just the relevant data that we would need to locate where you are and make a record of that. And the last page is probably the important one. This is the one where we want you to identify the condition number, you know, the reason that you're unable to comply, what alternatives are considered, what the risk to the environment is. So that's really what our interest is in, is whether it's going to be, if it's got potential for causing environmental harm. That's a really important factor, and we need to work closely with you. What the basis of the risk is once you've done that assessment, and what you'll be doing to mitigate the risk, what you'll be doing otherwise, and how long you expect that this will occur. So I guess the more you put into this, the easier it will be for us to support you and to assist you in any way that we can. The front page also says that if the department requires further information after receiving the form, an officer will contact you within 10 business days. So it will only be more information if this information sort of isn't enough for us to make an assessment. But I think hopefully that gives a bit of comfort to industry. I do encourage any of you, if you've got any concerns or problems coming up or arising at any time, make contact with your local compliance centre, and they're there to help and to talk through what options might be reasonable. So I'll move on to the next topic that might be of interest for you guys from our department's point of view. The reef regulations were set to commence on 1 December this year. So this was going to probably, well, it was going to impact the councils within the reef catchments, and especially with an activity such as sewage treatment, because these regulations require activities which discharge nutrients or sediments into reef catchments to offset their residual impacts to reef water quality, or else the activity may be refused. This is only applying to new or expanded activities. But again, in direct response to the COVID-19 crisis, the government has deferred commencement of these provisions to the 1st of June 2021. And this is to help support industry to have a suitable amount of time to prepare for these changes. So hopefully, if you've got any questions or queries on that, we can always discuss that. But that was another initiative. So the next thing I thought I would talk about is the Justice and Other Legislation COVID-19 Emergency Response Amendment Bill. This bill was passed just last Thursday. It includes amendments to the EP Act, which are relevant, and it provides 2 new mechanisms for our portfolio to respond to the COVID-19 emergency. So the provisions in Part 7 of the bill, which relate to the EP Act, allow for the Minister to make a declaration exempting compliance with certain conditions of an environmental approval, and this includes TEPs, TELs, EAs, or the new temporary EA. And it also allows the administering authority to issue temporary environmental authorities where these actions are deemed reasonable because of the COVID-19 emergency. This particular approval is, the same as, or acts the same as, an environmental authority, and this really complements some changes that occurred to the Planning Act, which brought in temporary use licenses. Temporary use licenses allow for it's like a temporary land use approval or a temporary relaxation to development conditions in relation to the COVID-19 emergency. And if that land use change also involves an ERA, you could then also apply for a temporary EA. These provisions in the EP Act will expire on the 31st of December this year. However, the temporary EAs and condition exemptions, should there be any, can be in place until 30 June 2021. And this will allow a period of time for the holder or the activity to transition back into normal operating or to get a EA in place in time for when that will expire on 30 June. So lastly, I guess I don't have a lot to say about economic recovery, except that that is the thing that we're all talking about now. There isn't any sort of silver bullet in this space. It's all uncertain for all of us. But last week there was an announcement of the COVID-19 Works for Queensland program, where an initial $200 million worth of funding is available to all councils. So I think the best thing is to be ready if you've got any projects on the back burner or in the ideas basket. It's a good time now to start thinking about how to form those up. Think about jobs, because this program will support all councils to undertake job creating and job sustaining productive building projects. And it especially includes projects focused on essential services, economic development and recovery and community wellbeing. So I think obviously your industry is well placed for projects under this funding. The other thing to think of is if you've got any shovel-ready projects that you've got underway, they would be suitable for this funding program. It will be about getting jobs and projects going as quick as possible. So that's really all I've got to say today. When I was booked in for this a few weeks ago, it was still all a bit desperate, but now it feels a little bit more relaxed. I'm hoping I've been able to provide you with an overview of the tools that are now in place, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. So if anyone wants to add questions, please type them in. We've got a few coming through, Chris. Just wanted to say, we don't often thank a regulator for adding more forms, but we're really impressed with the way DES made it clear how they were going to deal with the crisis right at the beginning. I guess it reduced a lot of angst and uncertainty out there. There is one question about the forms though. Someone said if we have recently made an exceedance notification to the pollution hotline that we had attributed to COVID-19, do we now have to lodge the COVID-19 compliance notification form?
No, I don't think so, unless you get advice from the relevant compliance centre going forward. But the form is really about notifying of any conditions that you're going to have an ongoing concern or inability to comply with those conditions. So it's about knowing ahead of time or flagging that ahead of time, or knowing that this is going to be ongoing. The Compliance Centre will apply the same rationale to your exceedance notification, in that you've provided information to demonstrate that the notification related to the COVID-19 crisis. So they're going to apply the same thinking and rationale to that as they would if you put it on the form anyway.
Cool, thank you. And I appreciate that you've given us a broad overview of everything to do with our sector from your department, even outside of your own area. With the reef extension, what would be the best approach for councils that were looking to expand or build new STPs at the moment, given that that's been delayed for 6 months?
Yeah, so delay or no delay, I think the advice is the same. Always try and think about ways that you can minimise that load to the reef. Often if it's an existing STP and you're looking at an upgrade, consider in your planning whether there are ways to shift that load to land, for example. So thinking about a project recently, this is prior to reef regulations, there's been a significant upgrade to Bowen STP. During their planning and proposal process, they looked at reusing the water for irrigating, you know, parks and gardens and greening and growing Bowen. So that was a really good community outcome. It was a good outcome for the reef because it reduced the load. And if they were applying for that now, because their load wasn't increasing or not increasing significantly to the reef, there would be little residual or no residual impact. So just look for those ways to keep diverting the load from the reef wherever possible. And I know I talk to you all the time. I know it's not always possible to establish irrigation projects, and it's not always the least cost solution, but going forward, you'll need to weigh up the cost of offsetting that load against other initiatives like reusing the water, where you might also get another benefit for the community, for example.
Cool, thank you for that. So we've avoided the issue of PFAS in the end of waste code. We had a few presentations a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of interest about what's happening there, particularly with the NEMP coming out. I was wondering if you can tell us more about the development of the methodology. We were working together on that before COVID, but how are you seeing things progress now?
Yes, so like all of you, we've had our attention diverted in the last couple of months. We were starting to work with the SWEET group, as you've mentioned, Rob, with a view to establishing a workshop if the industry was keen for that, to work through how we might develop a methodology, and our view was to then develop guidance material that could attach to the end of waste code. So I'm really keen to know from the industry if you would find that valuable, whether a workshop would be of value to you, so that you can provide us with your experiences to date, as well as I think it's always a good idea so that we can understand from a practical point of view what the methodology might mean to the industry. And yeah, so I guess I'd be hoping to go back to SWEEP in the first place, the SWEEP group, and see if that was still an option to commence a workshop with the industry and then develop that methodology together.
I did send a message out to the SWEEP group, to the South Sewage and Water Environmental Advisory Panel, a couple of weeks ago, asking for interest. I haven't received a lot of interest, so if there's anyone listening who is keen to know more about that, let me know where you want to go, and we'll work it out and work with Chris to get some more information to you. You also released a draft version for the sector before you go to public consultation of the SPS ERA standard that you've been developing. Can you tell us a bit more about the process for that?
Yeah, so I know it's been a long journey in regards to the sewage pump station ERA threshold. We did commit to, that's the word, we did commit to working with you guys in developing the update to the ERA standard, and it has taken a while between us and, you know, meeting and going through all those different things. So we have put together originally some information about what we'd be looking at in the ERA standard. We presented to, I think that was the SWEET group as well, or the technical advisory group. I just can't remember which one now, Rob. And we went away, did some work in our department. We've reviewed it all internally. One thing to remember is that this ERA standard is now, I guess, harmonised, or looks a lot like our other ERA standards. So there is the ERA standards exist because they should be low risk activities, and we can frame the risk of the activity and therefore have standard conditions that can be issued without assessment. So we've done that, we've put it together, and with our commitment to work with industry, we've gone back to you guys and said, have a look at it before we go through the next legislative step. So whether you've got comments or not, at this stage, once we go to through the legislative process to have that ERA standard finalised, we will have to do public consultation. So you will have more opportunity to provide comment to the department on that standard. But I would be interested if there is any comments, informal comments at this stage, so that we can look at that before we do that next step. We will probably, now that things are getting a bit more back to normal, we'll probably look to start that legislative process in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks. Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to have a look at it before it goes out for public consultation. I've got a couple of comments back. We'll be doing a joint response to you. I think I asked for comments back before the end of the month, so might be able to send you something by next week. One other question, you mentioned the shovel-ready projects. Everyone's talking about shovel-ready at the moment. I was just thinking of the Reef MIP project, the major integrated project that Ryan Cosgrove's running for LGAQ. There's been a number of proposals through there. Would you see them as being potential at different stages, but are they ones that we should be promoting as shovel-ready projects, do you think?
Yeah, certainly. I think so. Those projects have been developed with a view to meeting some important government policies, such as enhancing reef water quality. I think there's been a lot of thought put into those projects, and in some cases, I think there's probably some significant preparation for developing the project plans and whatnot. So again, whilst our department doesn't administer any of those grants funds that are generally available to local government, except for some in the waste space, we do provide comments to DLG RMA about any projects that come, any project proposals that come through, and we support those projects that I guess meet our state interests, which is improving environmental outcomes. And I see those projects that are being developed through the MIP as ticking a lot of policy boxes as well as environmental outcomes, and it makes it much easier for us to support that when we're providing advice back to other government departments.
Cool, thank you very much. Well, we might call an end to it there. So thanks very much for your time, Chris, and for covering a broad range of issues and facing the questions. If there's any other questions, we'll forward them on to you. Feel free to send us questions if you have them for Chris or the department. We'll try and get them to the right person. But yeah, thanks again for your time. It was really useful.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all the listeners out there. Don't forget that our presentations next week are from Philip Kamar on the microalgal and anaerobic treatment at Hillerden, and the Colossus project, the national project, from Dan Deere. Look forward to seeing you all again then. Thank you very much for attending. We'll see you next Thursday.